When you're looking for breakouts in fantasy baseball, you're always a little bit of faith or hope that players will gain extra playing time or some of their skills will further develop and they'll start to have amazing results on the field. However, today I'm going to show you two players whose underlying data already shows that they are the top 10 players or top 10 hitters in some of the most important StatCast data. And they're certainly not being drafted like that. And if you're already subscribed to this channel, you know I'm going to walk you through all the data to show you all the evidence. You don't have to agree with me, but at least we'll talk on the basis of the evidence. And I believe I was going to do a longer video on other prospects that people have mentioned in the comments or other players I think could break out. But as I look at the data, these two have the potential to return the highest return on investment for you if you grab them right, because nobody's drafting them where they really deserve to be drafted. The first one may not be a surprise to you, but it is Ben Rice of the New York Yankees. And he's already getting a little bit of prospect love. We'll see as we go through that. But I'm going to show you the data that says no matter what you're hearing about Ben Rice emerging, the data shows that it is not enough. And he is actually going to out exceed that and already did last year. Because you may argue, this guy already broke out in 2025. Why would you say you have a breakout year in 2026? It's because for some reasons no one believed in what happened in 2025 to the full degree. And I'm going to show you all the data behind it to where there's even more to go, and he's already a top 10 player in some very key stats. So right now on the NFBC website, Ben Rice is being drafted 56th overall, which is a pure crime that he is being drafted, depending on the size of your league, 5th or 6th round player. And in the Fantasy Pros, he's being drafted in 77th, which would be like a 7th or 8th round player, depending on the size of the league that you're in. He's moving a little bit up in recent ones we'll talk about, but if the people who are competing against in redraft leagues are using any of this data as a basis, then you will be able to get these players a round or 2 or 3 ahead of these guys and get a tremendous amount of profit from these players. Now going further in the FBC drafts, you can see there is a little bit of helium behind Ben Rice, where he's getting drafted closer to the top 40s in most recent drafts, certainly since the new year. However, overall, he's still relatively low, at least compared to the data I think I'm about to show you. And he's really 41st in some of the more recent ones. Again, still just a little bit ahead Wyatt Langford and Bryce Harper, but you'll see that I think there's more for him to go, and he's already proven it. And by having more access to more playing time with the Yankees, it's only going to help his data. So here's the data behind Ben Rice, and this is actually an amazing chart. And looking at the top players and top hitters in the game, this is prospect savant data. Or sorry, this is baseball savant data, since he's no longer a prospect. And this data shows you all of his expected hitting stats. And you can see he is not average in anything. He's above average to exceptional in everything, 97th percentile in many things. And his xwOBA being the 97th percentile is tremendous. And what I love seeing is look at all these no doubt home runs here, and taking advantage of that nice right field out in Yankee Stadium and some of the airflows that you'll get in the summer months. So nothing in here shows any warning signs for Ben Rice. If he even just reproduces what he does last year, you'll see tremendous return on value for him, because I think a lot of people aren't fully understanding that whatever he did last year, it actually is fully supported in the underlying data and actually predicts that he underperformed. I'll show you some data in a little bit. He was one of the most underperformers in some of the stats. So when you take a look at weighted on-base average, last year, Ben Rice was 26. So weighted on-base average is a great stat because it shows you the quality of contact and takes into account your ability to draw walks and how much you strike out. So it kind of is a good reflection, and when you do some of these stats, you'll see some of the top players certainly at the top of this. So already we're looking at Ben Rice as one of the 26 top players in the game, just ahead of Junior Caminero, and I can tell you in 100% of the leagues you're going to be in, Junior Caminero will get drafted way ahead of Ben Rice. And there's a lot of conversations if he has catcher eligibility that he's going, where should he be drafted relative to Hunter Goodman, who also had a great year last year as well. But when you look a little bit further and you see the expected weighted on-base average, which means not really what they actually produce on the field, but how they hit the ball, what they expect it to be, Ben Rice is now a top 10 player, number 6 overall. And when you do expected weighted on-base average, you can see some of the top names in the game. If you believe Aaron Judge, Soto, and Shohei Ohtani, and even Schwarber and stuff like that are some of the top players in the game, they really need to start to look at Ben Rice, because he had a pretty big gap between his weighted on-base average and his expected weighted on-base average, which is why it's not only fully supported what he did last year, but there is actually more room to go, and he might have gotten a little bit unlucky. So now we look, if you have the potential to grab Ben Rice and he has a catcher in your league eligibility, then he is a complete cheat code because he's certainly, I believe, currently the #2 catcher overall, even though he's being drafted as like the 4th catcher overall. You can see here in the data, I put the people around him: Hunter Goodman, Shea Langoliers, and William Contreras. You can see their baseball savant data here as well. And now their data compares to Ben Rice. I don't even have to go through the exact stats. You can just see the color codes here with how many high 97 percentiles, 90 percentiles that Ben Rice has versus a lot of the other players. And people like Hunter Goodman have high chase rate, high strikeout rates that had some downside risk to their performance. And even William Contreras, his expected weighted on base average is relatively low, and none of their slugging percentages even come close to Ben Rice's expected 557 from last year, and they're currently getting drafted alongside of him or even ahead of Ben Rice. So if you have the chance to get him in a catcher league where he's eligible there, then I think you have to grab him relatively early, especially as the #2 catcher off the board. Now, for first base leagues, he's currently being drafted as the #7 first baseman. And you can see that puts him just behind Rafael Devers, Matt Olson, Bryce Harper, and Pete Alonso. But I think he has a chance of being drafted just ahead of Freddie Freeman. I think he has a chance to be drafted well ahead of some of these guys. Freddie Freeman is still very solid, but starting to get up there in age. Ben Rice's numbers are fantastic. Rafael Devers, I think that his data still looks pretty solid, but I don't think it's fully baked in yet. The hit he's taking by playing in San Francisco for his home games, if you look at his splits between Boston as a home field park and San Francisco, his stats start to drop off, and I think having a full year of home games in San Francisco will start to drag down his stats a little bit more than what's even baked inside this data. But even then, his expected slugging percentage is 487, where Ben Rice's was 557. And then when you get close to Matt Olson, that starts to have some conversation as to where these would be, because Matt Olson also had a certain excellent XW xWOBA at 395, but he's also starting to age, and the Braves themselves have been a little bit dysfunctional as a team, but his underlying stats look pretty good, other than his strikeout rate is also starting to creep up. So now we go to this data. This shows that if all these things I can show you, you may still say, hold on, Ben Rice did this last year. You're showing me stats about how he did last year, and sure, he may have ranked higher, but why would I believe that he could repeat this or do this again? And it's the fact here that the underlying data I showed you a little bit earlier, he was the least, the 8th unluckiest guy in terms of his actual weighted on base average performing below his expected weighted on base average. It means he got a little bit unlucky there, and the way he was hitting and driving the ball is belies that he has more room to grow and could actually produce better results. And actually suggests that Juan Soto may have a great year up ahead as well too. Now I'm going to show you this next one just for argument comparisons. I'm not saying this is true, but you can see I'm not saying draft Ben Rice ahead of Junior Caminero, but you saw that from last year their weighted on base averages were fairly similar. And you can see here, just looking at the projections on Fangraphs and where they will perform, you can see I think it's still a little bit lagging here for Ben Rice. It's in the 20s to 28 home runs. His BABIP is actually well below average. So if his BABIP even gets close to league average, which is more like 290, he has more upside to go. But he also got a little bit unlucky in BABIP last year as well too, whereas Junior Caminero was a little bit closer to where the league average was. So Junior Caminero, some people would have him still around the 40-ish home runs that he had last year. Some of them dropping down in the 30s. And if you've watched my videos or subscribed before, you can see I've mentioned in previous videos how much downside risk he has by no longer playing his home games in a minor league ballpark now that they go back to Tampa Bay, and that his data for his away games last year was actually quite scary, where his OPS dropped over 200 points in away games versus playing in a minor league ballpark. So what's the downside potential of him if he were to go back to Tampa Bay? And the fact that I think there is the potential for that downside risk if you're in a league where the batting average or on base percentage, if he gets closer to this away data of a 218 batting average he had on the road last year, or 266 on base percentage on the road in 77 games last year, that can start to drag you down. It's certainly going to drop. He's not a 313 hitter in Tampa Bay next year, so that's going to come down a little bit. The question is, how much will it drag it down overall? I'm not saying draft Ben Rice over Junior Caminero, but you can start to see where Ben Rice's overall profile looks to be a bit safer, where you can get him in the drafts a little bit later, rather than this potential downside risk for Junior Caminero. So now here's when they go to xWOBAcon. So when they make contact, who is doing the most damage? Now you can see some people here. You definitely see Judge, Shohei Ohtani, Kyle Schwarber, Juan Soto, guys you expect to see. But now you also see, since it's only once they contact the ball, when a player contacts the ball, how much damage are they doing? Now you start to see the guys that we know can do damage to the ball, but have some contact issues, like James Wood, Joe Adele, and some other players like that down the line. And even then, you can see once he contacts the ball, Ben Rice is still doing the 15th most damage in the league as of last year, and he got specifically, not really lucky. His weighted on base. Through contact was 402, and his expected was 453. So there's more upside even there as well, suggesting more possible favorable results for him in the future. So if you have a chance to get Ben Rice with any kind of profit, third or fourth round in your league, he is going to return tremendous value for you and could be a steal, especially if he has catcher eligibility. But let's say someone else in your league has seen this video and jumps up really early and grabs Ben Rice. What do you do at that point? Well, I think Michael Busch is the second option that you could get. He is definitely being drafted well below where he is, and he could be a tremendous value as well. So last year, Michael Busch had a fantastic xwOBA of 378. You can see all these no doubt home runs here, Wrigley and so forth. And his data is not as great as Ben Rice's. You can see a little more strikeout rate, a little lower bat speed, but everything else looks fairly solid. And he did hit 34 home runs last year. So we're expecting to see, could he potentially do that again? I think his data says he absolutely could do that again. He actually got a little bit unlucky in his weighted on base average versus expected. But I think it shows strong support for at least repeating it. And I'll show you this. So if we go back to this data of expected weighted on base average, Ben Rice was sixth in the top 10. However, Michael Busch is number 10. So if you start to lay out of all the StatCast stats, which ones are the most predictive of a player's performance, or at least where you would draft the players, xwOBA is a really good one because you can see Judge, Soto, Ohtani, even Kyle Schwarber, guys that are known to be some of the best hitters in the league. However, if you believe that, then you need to start seeing that Ben Rice and Michael Busch aren't potentially breakout players. They're already performing as some of the top hitters in the league. They just either need more at-bats or more time, or some people just are discounting them because they don't believe that they will actually repeat this data for the next year, because they don't see the data that we see in the underlying data that is fully solid and fully supportive of what they did, and I highly expect them to repeat it, if not potentially improve it, as they get some more playing time. So now Michael Busch here is even more of a steal because he is currently being drafted 106th overall in the FBC drafts, and that is 10th, 9th, or 10th round, depending on the size of your league, and for first base, and that is an absolute steal. If someone has the potential to be one of the top 10 hitters in terms of xwOBA, that is an absolute steal. In fact, while I would agree that Ben Rice is getting a little more press, a little more love, and as it gets closer to spring training and maybe more eyes on the Yankees, he might float up the draft boards a little bit. Currently, Michael Busch is staying pretty solid, somewhere between 106 and even 100 in the the last month or so of drafts. So he's still not getting drafted very high. And you can see here, from among first basemen, he's being drafted 13th overall. So he's getting drafted 13th at 108 behind Salvi Perez, Tyler Soderstrom, Vinny Pasquantino, even Josh Naylor, and even aging Freddie Freeman behind Ben Rice. But I think that he has the potential to return so much value. If you get him anywhere that 9th, 10th round, even reach up to the 7th, 8th round and pick him up, I think he's going to return tremendous value. Take a look at this among the first basemen that he was listed near. His expected weighted on base average is 378. His slugging is 548. That's what's really amazing. Is when you look at Salvi Perez, he still has some decent. He's aging, so he might not be able to repeat this. He actually got a little bit unlucky with his weighted on base average last year. His expected was a little bit higher at 357. And his slugging was 534, but he does have extreme risk in his chase and a really low walk rate, so that may prove some downside risk as he starts to age. Tyler Soderstrom had a pretty solid year and will be still playing in a favorable minor league ballpark in Sacramento. But you can see his numbers weren't, and he had nothing around the top 10th percentile like Michael Busch. And his expected slugging is 457 versus Busch at 548. Even Vinny P, his data looks pretty mediocre, other than he doesn't whiff and doesn't strike out a whole lot, but his slugging is 463 and his xwOBA is 334. And even Josh Naylor, stuck in Seattle where it's not a great hitter's ballpark, you can see some really concerning stuff here in those chase rates, as well as his expected slug is only 436. So Michael Busch, I think, compares favorably already to each of those players, and he should be moved way above those lists of them. in any first base rankings that you're in for the year, and I think he can return a tremendous investment. If you can get him anywhere near the 100 or even early 90s, early 80s, he's going to return tremendous value for the year. Now, if you look at this again, looking at the expected weighted on base average on contact, this is where you can see here we had Ben Rice at 15 and Michael Busch at 11. So both these players, when they actually make contact with the ball, they are in the top 15 players of hitters in the league. And you can see some other big names like we just talked previously. So if you believe Judge, Shohei Ohtani, Kyle Schwarber are fantastic hitters, or James Woods good when he actually makes contact, you need to start believing that Ben Rice and Michael Busch are up there with those hitters when they make contact. When you look underneath the data and see that these two actually have better walk rates and lower strikeout rates than some of these higher risk guys like James Wood, even Joe Adell, and Mike Trout, I think that's why it's fully fitting for the Xwoba data to have them really up high. So Ben Rice would be number 6, Michael Busch at 10th overall. I'm not saying you should draft these guys as 6 and 10 overall, but if you're in a league where you can get Ben Rice with catcher eligibility sometime before pick 40, and you can flip around and wait and get Michael Busch somewhere around 80 or 90 for your first baseman, your team is set up for an absolutely fantastic fantasy baseball year. And I think these two guys were worth doing a deep dive just on them because of everything we could talk about this whole season. Those two could return the highest return on investment for your fantasy baseball teams this year.